The breaking point captain. Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the Galactic Trade Assembly, watching ships from 47 different species dock at the massive space station. The structure was bigger than most human cities, a sprawling network of interconnected rings that rotated slowly in the void between star systems. Each ring belonged to a different species, designed according to their specific environmental needs. The human section was small, tucked between the waste processing facility and the maintenance bays. Sarah had been humanity's chief trade representative for 5 years now. 5 long years of smiling, nodding, and accepting whatever scraps the other species were willing to throw Earth's way. She touched the communication device on her wrist, checking the latest message from Earth's agricultural colonies. The news wasn't good. Captain Chen, the assembly is ready for you. The voice belonged to Crix, an insectoid Mantari who served as her assistant. His species had joined the galactic community 300 years ago, and still remembered what it was like to be the newcomers. That made him one of the few aliens who treated humans with genuine respect. Sarah walked through the corridors toward Yari, the main assembly hall. The walls were covered with symbols and writing from dozens of different languages, but there was no human script anywhere to be seen. After 5 years of successful trade negotiations, humanity still wasn't considered important enough to have their language included in the station's signage. The assembly hall was enormous, with seating arranged in a complex hierarchy that put the oldest and most powerful species at the center, while newer members sat in outer rings. The Zephyrian Empire held the central position, their crystalline forms catching and reflecting light in dazzling patterns. They had been the dominant trade power for over 2,000 years. Around them sat the other major powers, the plant-like Verdani Collective, the energy beings called the Luminate Council, and the militaristic Kronar Federation. Each species had dozens of representatives, armies of advisors, and entire sections of the station dedicated to their needs. The human delegation consisted of Sarah, Crix, and Dr. Marcus Webb, Earth's leading xenobiologist. 3 people representing 8 billion humans and dozens of colony worlds. Today's session was supposed to be routine. The Zephyrians had requested a review of the trade agreements governing human agricultural exports. Earth's colonies produced some of the most nutritious and abundant food in the galaxy, and several species had become dependent on human crops. Sarah had prepared charts showing record harvests and proposals for expanding production. She never expected what came next. The Zephyrian Empire hereby claims sovereignty over all human agricultural colonies, announced crystalline speaker Vaxon, his voice resonating through harmonic frequencies that made the air itself vibrate. These worlds exist within the traditional territory of our empire, and will now pay appropriate tribute for the privilege of continued existence. Sarah felt her blood go cold. Traditional territory was a legal concept that allowed older species to claim systems they had never actually colonized, based on ancient survey maps and exploration records. The Zephyrians were claiming ownership of worlds where human families had lived and worked for generations. Speaker Vaxon, Sarah said, standing slowly and using her most diplomatic tone. The colonies in question were established in uninhabited systems with full assembly approval. Human settlers have invested decades of work developing those worlds. The Zephyrians' crystalline form shifted colors, cycling through what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of laughter. Young species often confuse assembly permission with ownership rights. The colonies may continue to operate, provided they deliver 90% of all agricultural production to designated Zephyrian collection points. 90%! Sarah's mind reeled. That would leave barely enough food to sustain the colonists themselves, let alone supply Earth or other human worlds. It was economic slavery disguised as legal procedure. Dr. Webb leaned over and whispered, urgently in her ear, "Sarah, if they take that much food, the outer colonies will starve. The populations are too large to evacuate, and we don't have the infrastructure to supply them from Earth." Sarah stood again, this time abandoning diplomatic protocol. Speaker Vaxon, the demand for 90% of agricultural output is unreasonable and unsustainable. It would result in humanitarian crisis affecting millions of human colonists. Humanitarian concerns are not the Assembly's responsibility, replied Vaxon coldly. Each species must manage their own population growth and resource allocation. Perhaps humans should have considered these factors before expanding so aggressively. Aggressively? Sarah almost laughed at the irony. Humans had been the most cautious, most respectful species in the entire Assembly. They had followed every rule, respected every boundary, and asked permission for every expansion. Meanwhile, species like the Kronar had conquered entire systems through military force, and the Verdani had simply grown over uninhabited worlds without asking anyone. We request a formal review period to examine the legal basis for this claim, Sarah said, trying to buy time. Denied, Vaxon responded immediately. The claim is based on Survey Archive 7431Z, filed during the Second Expansion era. All documentation is publicly available. Implementation begins in 30 standard days. 30 days. Sarah felt the walls of diplomacy closing in around her. She had spent 5 years learning the intricate rules and procedures of galactic politics, always believing that patience and proper procedure would eventually lead to fair treatment. Now she realized that the rules were designed to benefit the oldest and strongest species, while newcomers like humanity were expected to simply accept whatever was decided for them. Around the assembly hall, representatives from other species watched with expressions ranging from boredom to amusement. This was entertainment for them, watching the humans struggle against a system they could never hope to change through conventional means. The Mantari delegate from Crix's homeworld stood up. The Mantari Republic requests clarification on the EU enforcement mechanism for this tribute collection. Sarah felt a moment of hope. Perhaps some species would object to such blatant exploitation. Enforcement will be handled through standard economic sanctions, Vaxon explained. Any human colonies that fail to meet tribute requirements will be classified as rogue settlements and removed from assembly protection. Trade routes will be restricted, and defensive support will be withdrawn. The Mantari delegate nodded and sat down without another word. Sarah realized with growing horror that this wasn't a negotiation or even a legal proceeding. It was a formal announcement of decisions that had already been made in private meetings that humans were never invited to attend. "Is there any other business regarding human colonies?" asked the assembly moderator, a floating gas being whose species Sarah had never been able to pronounce. This was it. This was her last chance to speak for humanity through official channels. Sarah stood up one final time, abandoning all diplomatic training and speaking from her heart. "Honored assembly members," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "For 5 years, humanity has operated in good faith as members of this community. We have followed every regulation, respected every boundary, and contributed valuable resources to the galactic economy. We have asked for nothing except the right to exist and grow as a species." Some of the alien representatives actually looked up from their personal devices and side conversations. "We have provided food to species facing famine, medical supplies during plague outbreaks, and technological innovations that have benefited everyone in this chamber. We have done this not because we were required to, but because we believed in the principles of cooperation and mutual benefit that this assembly claims to represent." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Today we have learned that all of our good faith efforts were meaningless. We have learned that in this assembly, might makes right, and the only law is the law of the strongest. We have learned that our politeness was mistaken for weakness, and our cooperation was seen as submission." The chamber was growing quiet. Even the powerful species at the center were paying attention now. "So I want to make something very clear to this assembly," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a level that somehow seemed more dangerous than shouting. "Humanity's politeness was a choice. Our cooperation was a gift. Our restraint was a courtesy. None of these things were signs of weakness, and all of them can be withdrawn." Speaker Vaxon's crystalline form shifted to a deep red color that Sarah had never seen before. Are you threatening this assembly, human? Sarah smiled, but it wasn't the diplomatic smile she had worn for 5 years. This smile was something entirely different, something that made several alien representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. No, Speaker Vaxon. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply informing this assembly that humanity's diplomatic phase is now officially concluded. We tried being polite. We tried following your rules. We tried earning respect through good behavior and fair dealing. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. From this point forward, humanity will operate according to the same principles that govern every other major species in this assembly. We will look out for our own interests first, and we will use whatever methods are necessary to protect our people and our colonies. The chamber erupted in whispers and electronic chatter as species consulted with each other about the implications of Sarah's words. Speaker Vaxon rose to his full height, his crystalline form now blazing with angry red light. You forget yourself. Human. Your species lacks the power to back up such bold words. You have no military fleet, no economic leverage, and no allies willing to stand against established powers. Sarah's smile widened. That's where you're wrong, Speaker Vaxon, but I understand the confusion. You see, we've been so polite for so long that you never bothered to find out what we're actually capable of when we stopped trying to be nice. She touched the communication device on her wrist and spoke clearly into it. This is Captain Sarah Chen to Earth Command. Protocol courtesy is officially terminated. Implement Directive 7 immediately. The message was transmitted on an open channel that every species in the assembly could monitor. Within seconds, communication systems throughout the station began receiving responses from Earth and human colonies across the galaxy. The age of human politeness was over. The true human response, the first sign that something had changed, came 12 hours after Sarah's message to Earth Command. Trade ships throughout the galaxy began receiving notifications that all human agricultural exports were suspended, pending inventory and policy review. Species that had grown dependent on human food supplies suddenly found their orders canceled and their shipments delayed indefinitely. Sarah stood in the human delegation's small office, watching news feeds from across the galaxy. Dr. Webb was coordinating with Earth scientists and engineers, while Crix monitored communications from other species. The Mantari had chosen to remain loyal to humanity, one of the few species brave enough to openly oppose the major powers. The Verdani Collective is requesting an emergency meeting, Crix reported, his insectoid features showing confusion. They're offering significant concessions in exchange for resumed food shipments. Sarah wasn't surprised. The Verdani were plant-based beings who required specific nutrients that were abundant in human-grown crops. Their own agricultural worlds produced enough basic sustenance, but not the complex proteins needed for healthy reproduction. Without human food, their birth rates would drop dramatically within a few years. Tell them we'll consider their request after we finish our policy review, Sarah replied calmly. Estimated completion time is 60 standard days, twice as long as the Zephyrians had given humanity to comply with their tribute demands. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Dr. Webb looked up from his communications console. Sarah, you need to see this. Earth Command is transmitting something called the Clark Protocol. I've never heard of it before. Sarah smiled grimly. There were many things that Earth Command had kept classified during humanity's diplomatic phase. The Clark Protocol was named after Arthur C. Clarke, the old science fiction writer, who had famously said that any sufficiently advanced technology was indistinguishable from magic. It turned out that humanity had been developing quite a lot of magic, while everyone assumed they were just peaceful farmers and traders. The main screen in their office activated, showing Admiral Patricia Rodriguez, the head of Earth's space command. Behind her, Sarah could see what looked like a massive shipyard facility that definitely hadn't existed during the last public briefings about Earth's space capabilities. Captain Chen, Admiral Rodriguez began. Congratulations on finally getting permission to show these aliens what humanity is really capable of. The Clark Protocol is now active. All human vessels throughout the galaxy are transitioning to full operational status. Sarah felt a surge of anticipation. For 5 years, she had been negotiating from a position of apparent weakness, trying to build relationships and earn respect through patience and good behavior. Now she was about to discover what humanity had really been doing during those years of seemingly passive diplomacy. "Admiral, what exactly are we dealing with in terms of fleet strength?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez's expression was grim but satisfied. Every human exploration vessel and cargo transport in the galaxy has just revealed its true nature. We have approximately 800 ships currently operating in assembly space, all of which are now showing their actual capabilities. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. 800 ships. Humanity had told the assembly they had perhaps 50 vessels for exploration and trade. The real number was 16 times larger. "How is that possible?" Dr. Webb asked. "The assembly monitors all ship construction and movement. They monitor what we choose to show them," Rodriguez replied. "Human vessels use adaptive camouflage, technology and modular design. A ship that appears to be a simple cargo hauler can reconfigure into a heavy cruiser within minutes. We've been testing this technology for years, and the assembly never noticed because they assumed we were too primitive to deceive them." Sarah was beginning to understand the scope of humanity's deception. While aliens had been dismissing humans as naive and technologically inferior, Earth had been quietly developing some of the most advanced stealth and adaptation technologies in the galaxy. The door to their office chimed, and Crix announced that Speaker Vaxon had requested an immediate, private meeting with the human delegation. Sarah wasn't surprised. News traveled fast in the assembly, and the Zephyrians had undoubtedly detected the changes in human ship configurations. "Send him in," Sarah said. She was looking forward to this conversation. Speaker Vaxon entered the room with 2 heavily armed Zephyrian guards, his crystalline form flickering with nervous energy. The confident being who had demanded tribute 12 hours earlier was gone, replaced by someone who clearly understood that the balance of power had shifted dramatically. "Captain Chen," Vaxon began, his harmonic voice carefully modulated to sound conciliatory. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding about the agricultural tribute proposal. The Zephyrian Empire is prepared to discuss more reasonable terms." Sarah remained seated, not bothering with the diplomatic courtesy of standing to greet such an important visitor. It was a deliberate insult, and everyone in the room knew it. "I'm afraid there's no misunderstanding, Speaker Vaxon. Your tribute demand was perfectly clear. 90% of all agricultural production from human colonies, or face economic sanctions and loss of assembly protection." Vaxon's form shifted to a pale blue color that Sarah recognized as anxiety. The initial proposal was merely a starting point for negotiations. "Surely we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Actually, we can," Sarah agreed. "Here are humanity's new terms for continued agricultural trade with the Zephyrian Empire. Current market prices, paid in advance, with guaranteed long-term contracts that cannot be unilaterally modified. Your species will also provide formal recognition of human sovereignty over all colonies we have established, and support our application for full assembly membership with voting rights proportional to our economic contribution." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah had just demanded everything that humanity had been politely requesting for 5 years, and she had done it with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she held all the cards. "Those terms are unprecedented," Vaxon finally managed. "No species has ever been granted such rapid advancement in assembly status. No species has ever provided food security to half the galaxy while maintaining the largest exploration fleet in known space," Sarah replied smoothly. "But don't worry, Speaker Vaxon. If these terms are unacceptable, we have other options." Dr. Webb activated a holographic display showing a star map of the galaxy. Human-controlled systems were highlighted in blue, but now there were far more blue dots than anyone had realized. Earth hadn't just been establishing agricultural colonies. They had been quietly building a network of research stations, mining operations, and strategic outposts throughout unexplored space. As you can see, Sarah continued, humanity is no longer dependent on assembly trade routes or protection. We have developed alternative supply chains and defensive capabilities that make us completely self-sufficient. We can withdraw from the galactic community entirely if necessary. Vaxon's guards were scanning the star map with obvious alarm. The Zephyrian Empire's territory suddenly looked much smaller and more vulnerable, surrounded by so many human outposts. However, Sarah said, her tone becoming slightly more conciliatory, humanity prefers cooperation to isolation. We believe the galaxy is better when species work together as equals. We are prepared to continue contributing to the galactic community, but only as full partners, not as junior members begging for scraps. Crix looked up from his communication console. Sarah, I'm receiving similar messages from representatives of 17 different species. They all want to negotiate new trade agreements directly with humanity, bypassing the traditional assembly approval process. Sarah wasn't surprised. When you controlled the food supply and had the largest fleet in the galaxy, everyone wanted to be your friend. The question was whether humanity would remember who their real friends had been during the years when they were considered weak and unimportant. Speaker Vaxon, Sarah said, turning back to the Zephyrian leader. You have 24 hours to provide a formal response to our terms. After that, we'll assume the Zephyrian Empire is not interested in continued cooperation, and we'll adjust our policies accordingly. Vaxon's crystalline form was now cycling through rapid color changes, clear signs of extreme agitation. Captain Chen, surely you understand that such drastic changes to established relationships cannot be implemented overnight. The Assembly has procedures, protocols. The Assembly had procedures for treating humanity fairly, Sarah interrupted. You chose to ignore them. Now you'll live with the consequences of that choice. She stood up, finally offering Vaxon the diplomatic courtesy he had been expecting, but now it felt more like a dismissal than a greeting. The age of human politeness is over, Speaker Vaxon. We tried playing by your rules, and you used our good nature against us. From now on, humanity will operate according to the same principles that govern every other major power in this galaxy. We will do whatever is necessary to protect our people and advance our interests. Vaxon left without another word, his guards trailing behind him. Through the office's observation window, Sarah could see increased activity throughout the station as species scrambled to adjust to the new reality. Dr. Webb was monitoring communications channels. Sarah, the response is incredible. We're getting cooperation requests from species that have never spoken to us before. The Mantari Republic is offering a formal alliance. Even some of the major powers are reaching out through back channels. Sarah nodded. Fear and respect often looked similar from a distance, but she could tell the difference. Some species were reaching out because they were afraid of humanity's newly revealed capabilities. Others were genuinely interested in building relationships with what they now recognized as an equal power. The trick would be remembering which was which. Crix approached her with a personal message pad. Captain, this just came in from the Kronar Federation. They're requesting a private meeting to discuss mutual interests and shared concerns about galactic stability. Sarah almost laughed. The Kronar were the most militaristic species in the Bioware Assembly, respected and feared for their aggressive expansion policies. Now they wanted to talk to humanity about shared concerns. Schedule the meeting, she decided, but make it clear that we're interested in discussing partnerships between equals, not arrangements between senior and junior partners. As the day continued, Sarah began to understand the full scope of what humanity had accomplished. While aliens had been dismissing them as polite but irrelevant newcomers, Earth had been quietly building the infrastructure of a major galactic power. They had developed advanced technologies, established strategic positions throughout the galaxy, and created economic relationships that made them indispensable to dozens of species. Most importantly, they had done it all while maintaining the moral high ground. Humanity hadn't conquered anyone, hadn't stolen resources, hadn't committed genocide or enslaved other species. They had simply worked harder and smarter than anyone else, while being polite enough that nobody noticed what they were really accomplishing. Now, the galaxy would have to adjust to a new reality. Humanity wasn't going anywhere, and they were no longer going to accept being treated as anything less than equals. The age of human politeness was over, but the age of human leadership was just beginning.